I remember I used to be fond of the summer, but it seems to have grown on me. When I say grown on me, I mean it's starting to piss me off. I don't know exactly why I enjoyed the previous summers, and it's weird, because I was really anticipating this one. The only conclusion I could come to was that I was just less happy than I had been in a long time. Though over these summer days, I have learned what it is truly like to be unhappy. I was taught the meaning of fear, agony, and pain. Me and my older brother Mark were sent to live with our grandparents from my father's side when my mother passed away from being severely ill. Me and Mark never had the chance to meet our father, but we had always been in contact with our grandparents. They would tell us stories about him and how he met our mother. They were always welcoming, and we had absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. When we moved here, it was a week before my birthday, and by that time I would have finally reached 17 years old. Mark was about a year ahead of me, so he was always a good friend growing up, a true brother. My grandparents lived in a small town area and had a house out in the countryside. We moved in and settled our belongings in the room they provided us with. Me and Mark had to share a room, and ultimately a bed. Mark had a small problem with that, but he was able to wave it off after a few nights. Our room was a square room, with a full-size bed that was placed against the wall. The wall just opposite of the wall that the bed leaned against had a side table window with a screen door behind it. This was a nice little feature. We could get some nice breeze in the room when we felt like being lazy. Just outside of the window was a few acres that my grandparents owned. I remember the first time I looked out there. I noticed a long swing for children hung down by the trees. It seemed weird to me, but I paid no attention. Overall, it wasn't a bad move, and it seemed like a nice little spot of paradise as we mourned our loss of our mother, whom we loved dearly. We thought it was paradise. "Forget this," I grumbled, laying on the bed with my hands behind my head. "Forget what?" Mark responded, who was slouching in a chair with his feet propped up against the desk, a book in hand. "The weather. I'm sick of it. It's too hot." I sat up against the bedstand with my knees bent in towards me and my arms extended out to rest on my legs. I exhaled distressfully. Mark went back to reading his book. His eyes did not leave the pages as he turned them. "You never used to hate this weather," he smirked. My arm stretched up to crack and relieve the joints. "Yeah, I guess things change when you're getting older." I made sure all the joints were relieved before I got up and made for the screen door. "I'm going for some air." Mark made no effort to respond as I left the room to go outside. I walked over to Grandpa's shed, where he'd usually be working on smithing horseshoes. My grandparents didn't have any livestock, though Grandpa seemed to enjoy foraging them for sport and selling them off to horse breeders. He made a quick buck and never had a problem putting them together. I stepped into the garage and found my grandfather dropping a hammered horseshoe into a cooling bath. He looked over his shoulder and saw me enter. "Hey there, Jimmy boy," he greeted in his rough, weathered voice. He slipped off his leather gloves and tossed them aside. "What brings you here?" I plopped down on one of the dirty lawn chairs he had just lying around the shed. It was a bit uncomfortable, but comfort was the least of my concerns. "I just thought I'd get some air." Grandpa interrupted. "Yes, this drought is taking a toll on plenty of farms out there." He rambled for a little while about how the heat was affecting the crops locally. Eventually, he stopped himself and looked over to me. He smiled. "Say, actually, I do have something for you." He turned to one of the walls of the shed, looking for something. I peeked up from my seat and tried to get a view of what Gramps was reaching for. "You do? What is it?" I questioned curiously. Gramps turned around with a bow in his hand. He walked over to me as I sat and offered it to me. "I know you're a little old for this kind of thing, but it's your birthday tomorrow." He grinned happily. "And you're never too old for craftsmanship." I looked at the bow, then back up at Grandpa. I took hold of the bow and felt around the sides of it. It was nicely whittled, and the surface of it was textured very smooth. As I ran my fingers down the string of the bow, I smiled like a little boy. "Thanks, Gramps. Did you make this yourself?" "It's perfect." I gave the string of the bow a couple of light flicks. Gramps' smile never faded. He went back to his spot to take a seat and rested his chin on his fingertips. "I didn't. Your father did." I looked up, surprised by the words of my grandfather. I did hear about my father living here in his childhood, but nothing about crafting things like this. "Really? I never knew. This is very nice." I felt somewhat proud of this bow, knowing that it was made by my father himself, even if I'd never met him. I just felt comfortable knowing. Gramps yawned and stretched his achy arms. "It's all yours. He meant to give it to you in the first place." "What? How?" All of this was so shocking to me. There were things that I never heard about my father. There was a question that I never thought about asking until now. Maybe it was because I didn't want to know. I was just fine making do without knowing. Suddenly, though, I had the urge to ask. "Gramps, what happened to my dad?" Gramps bellowed a sigh. "You left here in such a rush when you knew your mother was pregnant. His bags were packed all before he told us he was leaving." He held a horseshoe in his hand and twirled it as he spoke, his eyes focused directly on the metal. Before he could continue, we heard Grandma calling us in for supper. We got up and left the shed to meet Mark and my grandmother, preparing to eat at the table. It was something that me and Mark hadn't experienced for a long time, a home-cooked meal. Though throughout the entire meal, I couldn't help but wonder what happened to my father. It was something that I almost never thought about, and it confused me as to why it was bothering me now, of all times. Gramps didn't speak to me at all afterwards. I tried not to think about it, but the damn question kept haunting my mind. It was growing to be a mystery that I had to solve. Me and Mark were back together in our room, though he was on the bed now, still enjoying the book of his. I leaned on the side of the screen door as I sipped at my root beer pleasantly and in deep thought. It was starting to get dark, and the night was quietly still. Barely even a cricket would chirp from time to time. I stared out to the trees, observing the lonely swing that hung sadly. "You should get some sleep tonight, Jim," Mark explained to me as he read from his book. "You seem really stressed lately." He was right. I felt really stressed over the last few days, and I didn't know why. I assumed it was just because of all the events that had happened up to this moment. I looked over to Mark, frowning. "Yeah, I think you're right. I've been thinking a lot." Mark finally looked up from his book. His blue eyes were just like our mother's. His blonde hair resembled that of her as well. "Thinking about what?" He questioned me, curious of my thoughts. I looked back outside. Just stuff, I guess. I fixed my sight on that swing again. There was something strange about it this time. The swing was swinging back and forth as if someone had just shoved it. What scared me was that there was no wind at all. The night air was deathly still. I squinted my eyes and suddenly, I was able to spot what looked like two devious glowing eyes. "What the hell?" I whispered to myself. What is it?" Mark looked up to me and saw that I was just peering out the window, trying to eye something that seemed far away. "What are you looking at, Jim?" He joined me, looking out the window also. Just as Mark came to my side, the glowing eyes had vanished from my sight. "Is there something outside?" Mark's head turned, scanned for anything suspicious. I guess it was nothing." I passed it off, believing that it was my mind playing tricks on me. I was tired, and I needed to sleep. I closed the slidable glass door behind the screen door and went over to the bed. I lay down again with my hands behind my head. Mark shrugged and followed behind me. He picked up his spot next to me, reached to turn off the lamp next to the bed, and covered up to sleep. I did the same, though I laid there for a little while longer, thinking before my brain put me to sleep. The next day was pretty special for me. It was the day that I would turn 17 years old. When I woke up, I nearly forgot that it was my birthday. We spent the day mostly just celebrating it. My grandmother made a cake for me. It was chocolate with vanilla frosting covering the top of it. We shared the cake equally between the four of us. The taste of it was almost just like a piece of happiness in each bite. I was so grateful that my grandmother put so much effort into it, and that itself reminded me of the warm welcome they offered. However, that night as I was drifting off into slumber, something woke me. A high-pitched screech that sounded almost like a small dying animal. The sound was just so loud. It couldn't have possibly been a small animal. The screeching lasted for 10 minutes, and then it finally came to a stop, in silence. It was something so strange, so chilling. That night it took me a while to go back to sleep, but somehow, I managed. The nights after that were pretty peaceful. There was nothing odd that would throw me off during the night. At the same time, my grandfather didn't seem to make any contact with me. He would keep his shed locked as he worked and never really tried to make an effort to communicate. It bothered me, honestly. It made me feel like there was something he was hiding and didn't want me to know. Anytime I would try to talk to him, he was friendly, but he would shoo me off with some excuse most of the time. It was becoming increasingly difficult to get answers to my questions. Then, another night came that I heard the terrible screeching. My eyes shot over to the sound of it. It was a lot louder than the last time I heard it, like it was closer to the house than before. I wasn't going to stand for it this time. I threw my covers off of me and worked to get out of the room silently. "Where are you going?" Mark asked in a tired voice. I turned to him and saw him lifting the covers up and leaning in my direction. "It's late, Jim. Where the hell are you going?" Then I'm sure he heard it when another loud screech burrowed through the darkness. I could see Mark's jaw drop slightly to the sound of it. Before I left the room, I saw those glowing eyes again in the distance from the window. I pointed up to the window intently. "I'm going to find out what the hell that thing is." I knew it was a stupid idea, but I couldn't just stand it anymore. With all this on my mind, I couldn't have this stupid thing ruling my fears. As soon as I left the room, Mark walked up to the front of me and took the lead. "I'll go with you. We'll grab the rifle from the shed and look." He nodded at me. I didn't know Mark would do something like this. I felt like I should have protested against it, but deep down, I was still scared and needed someone with me. Me and Mark went out the door and made our way for the shed. There, I was able to pull a rifle off the wall. Mark scrambled through the toolbox until he found a workable flashlight. We both went out into the property, sticking very close to each other. We made it out to the swing that was still swinging ever so lately. Mark flicked the flashlight about and searched for anything out of the ordinary, though it was completely silent and still. The screeching could not be heard, but there was a sense of dread about the night. "We should get back, Jim. It's too damn dark." Mark encouraged to go back to the house. We couldn't see a thing, but I had this feeling we were being watched. My palms were sweating like hell, and my heart was pumping as fast as ever. "Yeah, you're probably right, as always." I turned to Mark. "Well, we'll look around in the..." I froze, and my face went pale. I couldn't speak. I couldn't scream, and I couldn't move. Just as I looked back to Mark, a hissing sound emanated from behind us. "What? What's..." Above Mark's head was the jaws of something horrible. It was so close to Mark's face that it was clearly visible to me. Its neck was long and had thick feathered ripples going down its body. Its long, disgusting snout dripped horrendous drool from the bottom jaw. The creature's very being looked as if it had been rotting through its entire life. Just as it noticed I saw it, it released the very terrible screech that I had heard on those sleepless nights. The thing grabbed Mark and threw him to the ground, ripping at his sides. Mark screamed in agony as the monster attacked him, and I finally forced myself to move. I ran at the thing. It was a lot larger up close. It reeked of death and rotting flesh, but that didn't stop me. I lifted the rifle and shot at it. The shot grazed the shoulder of the beast. The monster let out a painful cry and then turned to me, leaping. At that moment, my heart stopped. The creature was on top of me, trying to snap me in its massive maw. I couldn't aim at the monster. I was using the rifle in both my hands to keep the sharp teeth of the monstrosity away. The mouth of the monster was wrapped around the gun as I pushed it with all my might to keep it away. After a while of fighting, the monster was able to chop the rifle into two with a great chomp of its bite. My eyes shut tight and I expected the worst. Suddenly, the sound of a shotgun blasted through the air. I opened my eyes and the creature rolled off and scurried off into the darkness. I looked to my left and saw Grandpa wielding a double-barrel shotgun. "Get your ass up," he yelled at me. He walked his way over to me as I lay on the ground shocked. He grabbed me by the back of my collar and lugged me up to my feet. "Do you want to die, damn it?" I was looking around for Mark, but I couldn't find him. I was in a panic, though Gramps paid no attention to Mark's disappearance. "Where the hell is Mark?" I yelled back at Gramps. Gramps only pushed me all the way back to the shed, checking behind him constantly for the beast. As soon as we got back to the shed, he grabbed a box of shotgun shells and loaded another buck into his double barrel. "We're killing this damn thing, kid," Grandpa spat. His face was calm and unhindered by the sight of that monster. I, however, was still scarred by the eyes of the nightmare. When the thing tackled me, I was so deathly close to it that it burned a mental image into my head. My heart was beating so fast and I could hardly breathe. Did it take Mark? God, we just left him there. Gramps grabbed another flashlight and flicked it on and off to make sure that it was working. He looked over to me with a serious glare. I didn't know what to do. The face of the creature terrified me. I said, "We're killing it, Jim. Grab something or it's getting away." Gramps stepped out of the shed with a shotgun in one hand and a flashlight in the other. I looked around, not knowing what to do. Then I saw it. The bow. I went over to it, scooped it up, and threw it over my shoulder. Just as I exited the shed, I grabbed a quiver filled with freshly fletched arrows, tipped with sharp piercing arrowheads. I caught up with Gramps and walked side by side with him. Gramps looked at me, then back to the trail towards the lone swing. "This damn thing killed your dad, Jim," he said in a low, mournful voice. "It's been haunting our family in these woods for ages, and it just didn't want your father to leave." The words that I were hearing from Gramps were just nonsense to me. I couldn't believe anything that I saw or heard on this night. I was scared, but I felt this anger inside of me that made me want this thing dead. "I think Mark is fine though, kid. He's your mom's boy, not our blood." I had to think about it for a little bit. Mark wasn't our blood? I had always thought that Mark was born from my mom and dad, though Gramps said otherwise. I had to hope for the best. I was praying that Mark was alive somewhere. Eventually we made it back up to the swing where Gramps shined the flashlight in the direction of where the beast was last seen. A trail of blood led into the woods. Gramps then looked at me, nodded, and started into the path of the blood. We walked for 5 minutes before Gramps put his hand on my chest and stopped me. "Stop," he whispered. "Listen." It was silent, and all that could be heard was the light breeze that riddled the branches of the woods. Then, we heard it. A hissing sound. The sound of the hissing grew louder and louder, and we knew it was coming. The beast was getting closer to us. The hissing turned to another one of the beast's light screeches and leaped towards Grandpa. Gramps pumped his shotgun at the monster, but it was a complete miss. The monster grabbed Gramps by the head and with its huge claws and bit into his shoulder. Gramps yelled in pain as the beast threw him aside and into a tree with a snap of its arm. I stared in terrible dread at the horrific monster. It turned to me, and it looked into my eyes with frightful glare. Then, the beast hissed again. This time, though, it hissed my name in a low and miserable tone. It said, "Jimmy." My heart sank, my stomach curled, and I wanted to throw up right then and there. but I couldn't. I had to move before it did. I went to draw an arrow and load it into my bow and aimed for its disgusting face. The monster got ready to run at me, and I hesitated, releasing an arrow onto the leg of the monster. It screeched and shrieked in pain as the arrow sunk into its large thigh. I didn't stop. I drew another one, loaded it, and aimed. The creature couldn't stop either and charged at me. Just as it made its way to me, my arrow flew right into the eye of the creature, with a heart-chilling slosh of blood escaping its head. The thing thrashed and screamed about, then landed right on top of me, still alive. It was crazed and attacking at random, slashing at my shoulders and arms. My heart raced with each blow made to my arm. I wasn't going to die here. I wasn't going to let it kill me. My free arm grabbed another arrow and began stabbing it repeatedly in the neck. My eyes were shut tight the entire time, but with each stab, it yelped and squealed as I pressed the sharp arrow into the rotting flesh. The blows began to slow down and weaker. The sounds it made got low and quiet, but I kept stabbing. My eyes stayed shut. I didn't want to open them. I didn't want to look at it. It felt as though I was there forever. The only thing I could think to do was just to keep stabbing. I only stopped because I couldn't move my arm when it started to hurt. My eyes creeped open and the monster laid there with its jaws gaping. It didn't move, and its blood leaked profusely all over my body. I wiggled myself free and scrambled away from the monster's corpse. I looked at my arm and shoulder, searching for deep wounds. Luckily, there wasn't anything severe. There were practically just scratches. I sighed, getting up with tears streaming down my face. I looked over to where Gramps was thrown and saw his lifeless body. I didn't want to stay here. I started towards the shed and walked until I made it back to the swing. I heard coughing. I looked around with the bloody arrow still in my hands and noticed that there was a flashlight on the ground. I picked it up and shined it until I saw his face. It was Mark, sitting down against a tree. I ran to him, scanning his body. He was breathing so deeply and had large gashes at his sides of his body. "Mark, are you okay?" He cracked his eyes open a bit. "Is it gone, Jim? Is it gone?" His voice was weak and blood trickled at the sides of his mouth. I knew I couldn't leave him here. I was both amazed and relieved that he was alive. I went over to comfort him. "Yeah, it's gone, Mark. It's gone." I wiped the tears out of his eyes, trying to keep his attention on me. "Stay with me, okay?" I picked him up and put his arm over my shoulder to get him on his feet. We limped our way back to the shed and called for Grandmother to help. Just as we made it back to the shed, we heard it. The terrible, petrifying shriek emitting from the woods.
I used to love my job. I was a watchman at a wind farm. All I had to do was make rounds a few times a night to make sure that no one was messing with the wind turbines. I would read a lot of books, and eventually, if I got bored, I'd bring my portable DVD player and watch movies all night. The only thing that broke up the time was the patrols. I'd arrive every night around 9 p.m. and get relieved by the day shift at 9 a.m. There wasn't much to it. I'd pull up beside the watchman that I was relieving, we'd exchange pleasantries, and he'd tell me if anything went on during the day, and then he'd be on his way. I don't remember him ever telling me anything more than seeing some deer or maybe a bear. There were a dozen windmills stretched over 5 miles, each connected by a dirt road. When I first started working for this company, I would get out and check the locks on the access door to each windmill. But after 5 years, I'd arrive by and barely glance at the things. Most times I'd still be watching my movie or show while I'm driving. Not a lot of traffic on the dirt roads. I drove into a ditch only once, but I got the car out with minimal difficulty. The worst part about that was the embarrassment. One evening, I was in a hurry and running late. I jumped in the car and I flew to the worksite with something nagging in the back of my mind. But I made it just in time and got my report and settled into my routine. I did my first round with no problem. Twilight had just faded, leaving the world diving into nighttime darkness. Clouds had been forming all evening, and I saw a flock of turkeys cross my path near one of the fields. That meant that it was going to storm. My first round through was a breeze. Nothing was happening, and I didn't even see animals that I used to see, except for the turkeys. Maybe since it was going to storm, the other animals were battening down the hatches and settling in wherever they were. The drive around the 5-mile dirt road circle took only about 30 minutes. They don't like us going very fast, and technically, we're supposed to check the door on each wind turbine. I and the other drivers have it timed so that way it looks like we checked. I got back to the main building at a little after 9:30. I pulled out my portable DVD player and started watching Die Hard. And of course, I fell asleep. And I woke to the credits rolling. Ah, shit, I said, remembering my missed round. I threw the car into gear and I flew off towards the wind turbines. It was right then that I remembered what I had forgotten. A flashing light had announced, low fuel. I cursed myself for forgetting to fill up yesterday on the way home. This is my second round, I thought. I should have enough time to make it through the rest of the night and to get to the gas station. This was the thought that I clung to the rest of the night. My second round was uneventful. My eyes were constantly drawn to the fuel gauge, but there was nothing that I could do about it. Once you were in for the night, you had to stay. If they caught you driving off the job, you were fired. I didn't want to lose such a gravy job, so I stayed put. Although there were a couple of times that I considered a quick 2-mile trip to the gas station. But the problem was my boss. He was a bit of a prick, and liked to pull surprise inspections at all hours of the night. I liked to pretend that he was being some nice guy and just showing up to see if I needed anything, but I knew why he was really there. If he showed up tonight, I would ask for a couple of gallons of gas. Maybe that would solve my problem and keep him from inspecting as often. Partway through my second movie, Die Hard 2, of course, I went for my next round. And it had just started to rain, making my windows fog up and my defroster wasn't working the best. By the time I went for my fourth round, the weather had made a decision to switch from mildly annoying rain to grab the animals and head for the Ark. It was raining so hard that I could barely see in front of me. I drove at a crawling speed. The rain had worn ruts in the road. In some of the lower depressions, there were puddles across the entire road. I was glad that I was driving a Jeep. I got right in the middle of one of the giant puddles when my engine gave out. I cranked and I cranked, but it was no use. I was out of gas. I was never going to live this down. I could hear it now. 5 years from now, the other guy would be telling the story about the moron who ran out of gas in the middle of a rainstorm. And so now I had a decision to make. Do I stay in the car and ride out the storm, or do I walk back to the main building and wait for the day shift to arrive? And I checked my watch. Nearly 8 hours until my relief arrived. The way that it was raining, there was no way that I was walking back. If there had been an emergency gas can full of fuel, I might have considered it, but the can hadn't had any gas in it for a long time. Yet another wonderful present from my idiot boss. He said that it was a waste of gas to have it sit around and grow old. I guess the concept of emergency never crossed his mind. I didn't want to drain my battery, so I stopped watching movies. Instead, I sat and I listened to the rain pounding on the roof of my car, like marbles dropping from the sky. And that's when my mind started playing tricks on me. I guess it was as bored as I was and decided to have a little fun. I was whistling a tune in my usual off-key way, the kind that makes people want to stuff cotton in their ears, when I happened to glance in the rearview mirror. And the mirror glanced back. I swore that I saw a set of eyes looking in through the back window. I whipped around so fast that my neck cracked, but nothing was there. I hit the door lock button just to be sure, as if that would help out here in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a downpour. My whistling grew louder and more off-key as I did everything I could to avoid looking in the mirror. But eventually, I couldn't resist. My eyes were drawn to it like a magnet. And I looked. And nothing. I chuckled nervously at myself for being so stupid and leaned back against the headrest. I don't remember falling asleep, but I do remember waking up to nothing. No pounding rain, no animals, no crickets. Just silence. It was unnerving. I lowered the window a few inches and listened. Still nothing. Not even the whooshing of the wind turbine blades. I looked at the closest one. Its blades were completely still. It was rare for the wind to be so calm that it couldn't even turn them. And I checked my watch. I'd been asleep for 4 hours. The storm clouds had drifted away and the moon had appeared. It wasn't quite full, but it was bright enough to light the ground and cast hundreds of tree shadows around me. It was a beautiful night, the kind that made me glad to live in rural Pennsylvania. It even made me rethink waiting in the Jeep until morning. My mind tugged back and forth as I hummed, should I stay or should I go? I looked at my watch again. In just under 4 hours, my relief would be driving through the gate. What would he do if I wasn't there? It'd be easier to explain to him and have him grab me some gas than wait for him to finish his first round and stumble across me sitting in the middle of the road. Decision made, I grabbed the flashlight from my glove compartment and stared for a long moment at the handgun lying beside it. I thought about having it, but decided against it. Most of the animals in these woods want nothing to do with humans. The rest can usually be scared off with a little yelling. I locked the door as I stepped out. My foot plunged into a deep puddle. I sighed as the water oozed past my ankle and filled my sneaker. The puddle stretched the entire width of the car, easily 12 feet across. Hopping wasn't going to help. It would only get me wetter. So I gave in and I set down my other foot and closed the door. I waded through the puddle until I reached dry ground, and I shone my flashlight at the nearest wind turbine, number 5, farthest from the gate. At the halfway point, it didn't matter if I went forward or backward. I chose forward and I started walking. For the first part of my trek, the only sound was my shoes squishing. It was unnerving, having silence and tree shadows as my only companions. I swept the flashlight across the trees, and eyes reflected back at me. Plenty of them, but they made no sound. It was like they were sitting in church pews, silently watching me walk the aisle in search of my seat. The eyes ranged from small to disturbingly large, yet none of them moved or spoke. Were they afraid of me? And I paused to take a break. And that's when I heard it. A footstep behind me. Not a heavy thud, but the soft squish of grass under a large foot. I whipped around, flashlight cutting through the dark, and nothing. I panned the light across the road, across the trees, and still nothing. Seeing nothing was somehow worse than seeing something. A deer, a bear, even a coyote. I could have handled that. But nothing? Nothing left my mind to fill in the blank with monsters. The silence pressed on me as I walked faster without realizing it. Even the squish of my sneakers seemed louder against the stillness. I thought about cutting through the woods. It would save me some time since the road looped for miles, and I would do this in daylight maybe. But in the dead of night, under a pale moon with dawn hours away, I didn't even consider it. I tried whistling again, hoping that it would calm my nerves. I chose the happiest tune that I could think of, but the echo came back bent and twisted, like the nursery rhymes that creep through horror films. And I stopped halfway through the verse. The silence that followed was worse, because it gave me another gift. Another footstep behind me. And I spun, flashlight jerking. This time it wasn't haunted by emptiness. This time I saw eyes. They glowed large and red, impossibly high off the ground, 8 feet at least. It was 40, maybe 50 yards away, peering from behind a tree. And those eyes will haunt me for the rest of my life. Unfortunately, I didn't know how long that would be, especially with something so monstrously large stalking me. I would love to say that I carefully weighed my options and came to a sensible solution for what this creature was and how to deal with it. But I didn't. I ran like the devil himself was chasing me. It surprised me that I kept hold of my flashlight. I found speech that I never knew I had. Desperation will do that. My mind raced faster than my feet, but there was no solution that it would come up with. I could hear the footfalls behind me coming closer. It was going to catch me. It was only a matter of when. As my mind grasped at any and every straw, my salvation rose in front of me like a lighthouse to the lost fisherman. One of the wind turbines loomed ahead. I knew the code to get inside in case I ever had an emergency and I needed to shut one down. I didn't think that I could run any faster, but hearing the footsteps behind me and seeing my salvation in front of me, I felt like the roadrunner putting on a burst of speed and disappearing into a cloud of smoke. And of course, that was all in my mind. Reality dashed the illusion as the sounds of massive feet grew even closer. It no longer cared about stealth. I could hear it on the gravel road now. My curiosity wanted to turn and at least identify my pursuer, but I forced myself to focus on what was in front of me. Stumbling, whether from distraction or from seeing the creature that would be my doom, would be catastrophic. The 400-foot monolith loomed large ahead. I envisioned where the keypad was, knowing that I had one shot to type in the code before my untimely death. And as salvation drew nearer, panic set in. I became obsessed with the notion that I would be caught at any moment. I had no idea what possessed me to do it other than sheer terror and desperation. I took the only thing that I had available to me, my flashlight, and I threw it backwards. By some miracle, I heard a muffled thud and a slight groan. And the sound came much closer than I wanted, but I still refused to look back. I reached the door of the turbine, punched in the code, and yanked it open, straining my arms against its weight. I was no sooner inside than I pulled the door shut, and just before it latched, a set of massive fingers approached the doorway. I pulled with everything I had, muscles straining to the point of breaking, and the door somehow kept its momentum towards closing. The giant fingers slammed between the door and the frame and then disappeared. An inhuman howl erupted from the other side as I shut and locked it. And I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air as my mind replayed the image of those fingers in the doorway, like a frozen playback. And I saw with startling clarity. They were the size of bratwursts, covered in brown hair, with claws protruding from them. And I lay on the floor panting, searching for options and finding none. For the moment, I felt safe. But how long would that last? How would anyone find me in here? Would they even look? Or would they assume that I was lost in the woods? And the biggest question of all, what the hell was that thing? I didn't want to speculate. The possible answers were too terrible to comprehend, especially with whatever it was lurking just outside. And just as my adrenaline began to ebb, a pounding shook the door. It reverberated through the hollow metal tube that was now both my salvation and my prison. I jumped up, not knowing what to do. My only escape route led straight into the claws of the monster. I looked around for options, but there were none. The door vibrated with each impact. I knew that it was sturdy metal, but even metal has its breaking point. As I scanned the small room, no more than 10 feet across, my eyes caught on something above me. A ladder. It stretched upwards into infinity. There seemed to be no end. Lights dotted the shaft every few feet, but that was a little comfort. And I considered my choices. Wait for the door to collapse, or climb an impossible ladder with no rest points, no timeouts, no do-overs. If I climbed, it would be all or nothing. Coming back down would only bring me back to this hopeless spot. I had no idea if I had the strength or stamina for such a climb, but another round of pounding on the door made up my mind. I stepped onto the ladder tentatively, as if waiting for the rung to give out beneath me. And after a moment, I tried the second one, and then the third. And on the fourth, disaster struck. I slipped and I fell back to the floor, landing in a puddle. It was a painful reminder that my shoes were soaking wet. Even though grip pads lined the rungs, I would still need to step carefully, using the arch of my foot instead of the ball. I got up and I checked myself for injuries. I was sure there would be bruises if I survived, but other than that, only my pride was hurt. The thumping on the door refocused my priorities. I stood and I stared up at the ladder again, stepping with the arch of my foot this time. I began slowly testing every foothold before committing to the next rung. And soon I gained confidence and I moved faster. My breathing grew ragged as the climb drained my energy. I regretted skipping supper. I hadn't eaten any of my snacks that evening. I paused my climb and I hooked my arm into the ladder to keep from falling as I caught my breath. And it was then that I made two mistakes. One was looking up and the other was looking down. When I had looked up, it seemed like I was no closer to the top than when I had started. When I looked down, I saw that I had made enough progress that a stumble would kill me. There was one other thing that I saw when I looked down, and it nearly made me cry. Hanging on the wall were several safety harnesses. A metal cable ran beside the ladder. And for a brief moment, I considered climbing back down to get a harness, but I realized that I might not have the energy to climb back up. And the rest of my climb seemed to take forever. My breaks became more frequent and lasted longer each time. My feet screamed for me to rest. I was near total exhaustion when I looked up and I finally saw the top of the ladder. The excitement carried me the rest of the way. I climbed off the top rung and collapsed onto the metal landing, and I laid there for what seemed like an eternity until my strength returned. I stepped through the door and into the generator room. It was cramped, machinery taking up most of the space. A narrow walkway ran beside the generator, and a hatch led to the outside. I looked around and I found a safety rig. I put it on, secured the line to a hook, and opened the hatch. Dawn had broken, and the world was lit with a brilliant orange of early morning. The beauty overtook me so completely that I didn't notice the wind. Dead still after the storm, now buffeting me, threatening to knock me off my feet. I stumbled, silently grateful for the safety line. One of the massive blades passed by only a few feet away. The only reason I had risked stepping out was to see if my pursuer had left. I slowly peeked over the side, fighting the nausea-inducing vertigo from my sheer height. I scanned the tiny trees below and I saw nothing out of the ordinary. I was about to go back inside when movement caught my eye. The creature. It had come from around the far side of the turbine's base. I marveled at how small it looked from up here, and yet it still left me with the same conundrum. How do I escape? I stepped back inside and I looked for answers. And after a brief search, I found a radio amongst the controls on the wall. I pressed a button and an alarm blared. I pressed it again to silence it. I tried another button and it was rewarded with static. Hello? Can anybody hear me? I repeated it again. Still static. On the third try, my boss answered.
What the hell are you doing in one of the units?
He barked. It was an emergency, and this was the only way that I could contact someone. And he harumphed on the other end.
What's the emergency?
I'd rather not say on the radio. Can you come get me? And he sighed.
Which unit are you in?
Number 6.
It'll be a little while.
How long?
Like, when I get there.
And the line went back to static. I felt a wave of relief, knowing at least someone knew where I was and was on the way. Eventually. Out of curiosity, I climbed back outside and I leaned over to check on the creature. My blood turned to ice. The creature was looking up at me. It must have heard the alarm. Then it did the thing that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It started climbing on the outside of the wind turbine. My eyes locked on the horrible sight. I kept hoping that it would lose its grip and fall, but it didn't. It climbed closer. When it was about halfway up, my mind finally woke to the danger and jolted my body into action. I lunged back inside, slamming the hatch, unfastening the safety line, and ran for the main ladder. The descent took far less than the climb. Several times in my haste, I slipped, nearly taking the express route straight down to my death. But eventually I made it. And as I caught my breath, I heard the top of the turbine being assaulted. The bangs echoed down the hollow tube, magnifying it into deafening booms. I opened the door as quietly as possible, praying that the monster's racket above would cover my escape. And as I did, a few brown hairs fell to the floor. I picked them up and I slipped them into my pocket. As I slowly opened the door, it made a slight creak. And suddenly, the noise above me stopped. And my heart leapt into my throat. I stopped breathing, my mind filled with unhelpful images of the creature jumping down and dismembering me. As I stood frozen, I smelled smoke. I looked up to see black plumes flowing from the turbine. I ran as fast as I could back to my Jeep, refusing to look back even as I heard a roar behind me. I nearly collided with my boss's car as he turned the corner.
What the hell?
He said, getting out. Look! Look! I shouted, pointing at the turbine.
I see,
he said flatly.
What the hell did you do? No! Look!
I insisted, pointing towards the black smoke.
What am I supposed to be seeing other than millions of dollars literally going up in smoke?
And I stopped and I looked at the burning machine. the creature was gone. And I jumped into the car and I slammed the door. Can we go, please? I said, trying to hide my terror. He stared at me for a moment. And then he got in the car, drove back to the main building. The whole way I kept shooting furtive glances behind us. He parked in front of the building and looked over at me. You're going to have to answer some questions. I know. But could someone please go get my car? I ran out of gas. That's why I was in the turbine. Why didn't you just wait in your car? And I opened my mouth to answer and then realized what I was about to say. And stopped and leaving it unsaid. Okay, he said, getting out. I'll send someone for your car. I followed him inside and lay on the couch in the break room. A short while later, a coworker woke me. Here's the keys to your car. It's parked out front, he said. And the boss wants to see you. I took the keys and stood, and I looked right towards my boss's office, and then left towards the exit. It took only a moment to decide. I turned left and I walked out the door. And I never returned. But the memory of that night has never left me, and never will. The following day, I read in the paper about the turbine fire and how they had found the carcass of a bear, supposedly trapped in the blaze, but I knew better. I knew that the company would come after me for the destruction of their expensive turbine. I also knew that if I told the truth, they'd haul me away in a rubber truck. Either way, I was about to disappear. And my story was never going to be told. I found a group that specializes in unexplained phenomena. I walked into their office with a bag in my pocket containing 3 brown hairs. I knew that they would want to hear my story.
I know how this sounds. I've told maybe 3 people about what happened out there in the Chihuahuan desert. And every time I do, I see that look. You know the one, the polite nod, the slight lean back, like they're trying to figure out if I've lost my mind or if I'm just pulling their leg. But I'm telling you exactly what I saw, exactly how it happened. This was back in 2019, late October. I'd driven out to the desert east of Roswell with my buddy's dune buggy. One of those stripped-down rail jobs with the big paddle tires. It was a perfect evening for it, too. Sun was getting low, painting everything that desert gold. Temperature finally dropping below hell-on-earth levels. You know how peaceful it gets out there when the wind dies down, and all you can hear is your own engine echoing off the mesas. I'd been riding for maybe an hour, hitting some of the bigger dunes, near bottomless lakes, when I decided to take a break. I killed the engine on top of this rise and just sat there, drinking some water, watching the shadows get longer. And that's when I saw the coyote. Nothing unusual about that. Desert's full of them. This one was maybe 50 yards out, just trotting along like they do, nose to the ground. Standard desert dog, kind of scrawny, grayish-brown coat. It disappeared behind this cluster of mesquite and creosote brush, thick stuff about head high. I'm sitting there maybe 2-3 minutes, just enjoying the quiet, when I see movement behind the same brush. Figure it's the coyote coming back around. But what walks out from behind those bushes is a man, tall and thin, wearing what looked like jeans and a dark shirt. Nothing weird about his clothes or anything like that. But here's the thing. There was nowhere for a man to come from. I'd been sitting up high with a clear view for miles in every direction. No truck, no ATV, no footprints in the sand leading to those bushes. And I'd been watching that exact spot where the coyote went in. The man stood there for maybe 10 seconds, just looking around. Never looked up at me. Never seemed to notice the dune buggy. But then he started walking, same direction the coyote had been going, same casual pace. like he belonged there. Like walking alone in the middle of the desert 40 miles from the nearest road was the most natural thing in the world. That's when my skin started crawling. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there. I've spent my whole life in this desert, hunting, camping, riding, and I've never felt anything like that. It was primal, like some part of my brain that remembers when humans were prey animals was suddenly wide awake and terrified. I fired up that buggy and took off without looking back. Didn't slow down until I hit pavement. The whole ride home, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see someone running behind me at impossible speed. People ask me if I really think it was, well, you know, what people say it was. Honestly, I don't know what I saw out there, but I know what I didn't see, and that was any way for a man to appear behind those bushes. I haven't been back to that part of the desert since.
I've never been able to shake the shadows that clung to my childhood. Those moments when the world revealed its hidden teeth, grinning in the dark. It started when I was 14, in a forgotten corner of eastern South Dakota, where the land stretched out like a corpse under an endless sky. The town was small, suffocated by humidity and silence, with gravel roads bleeding into blacktop veins, flanked by fields that whispered secrets to the wind. On one side, cornstalks swayed like sentinels. On the other, clusters of trees huddled together, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Summers dragged on, eternal and oppressive, and my only escape was a rusted bicycle, handed down from my brother like a curse. It creaked and groaned, but it carried me away from the stifling house, into the golden haze of late afternoons where the light turned everything to blood and gold. That day in late July, the air hung heavy, pregnant with thunderheads, brewing in the west like a gathering malice. I finished my chores, my skin slick with sweat, and pedaled out along the country road, aiming for a friend's place 5 miles out. We had plans, foolish, boyish ones, to explore an abandoned barn on the edge of town, where the fields sloped into a scattering of pines and cottonwoods that seemed to swallow the light. The road was empty, as always, but as I rode, the sky shifted. The clouds took on a sickly green hue, the wind dying to an unnatural stillness that pressed against my chest like a warning. I pedaled harder, ignoring the prickle at the back of my neck, telling myself the storm was still distant. But as I approached the narrow band of trees, a windbreak planted long ago by some rancher whose bones were now dust, the air grew colder, clammy, like stepping into a grave. A scent of damp earth rose up, as if the ground had already wept its secrets. The trees loomed, their trunks twisted and scarred, leaves quivering not from wind, but from something deeper, something alive within. I couldn't see beyond the first row. The woods always felt deceptive, a thin veil hiding a labyrinth of dark that stretched farther than reason allowed. That's when the sound slithered into my ears, a heavy, deliberate pacing just beyond the ditch, where barbed wire snarled like horns between road and shadow. It wasn't the innocent rustle of a deer or the scamper of a rabbit. No, this was measured, predatory, syncing with my breaths, as if mirroring my fear. My pedals faltered, the bike slowing to a halt. I scanned the undergrowth, heart thudding like a trapped animal. A gust rattled the leaves, and for a moment, I convinced myself it was nothing. The storm playing tricks, twisting light into phantoms. But then it moved. A shape, dark and hulking, 4 or 5 feet off the ground, lurking among the trunks. Not an animal, not quite. Too upright, too deliberate. My mind rebelled, grasping for explanations. A coyote on hind legs, a stray dog on feral. But the outline was wrong. Elongated, stooped like a thing pretending to be human. Its form a mockery of posture. It didn't flee like prey. It watched, still as death, eyes glinting in the fading sun like shards of glass in a wound. Those eyes, they held an intelligence, a hunger that pierced through me, sizing me up as if I were the intruder. I froze, knuckles white on the handlebars, the world nearing to that shadowed figure. The wind kicked dust across the road, but I inched closer, drawn by a morbid curiosity that tasted like bile. Foolishness, perhaps, or the arrogance of youth. But as I neared the fence, it jerked, swift, unnatural, darting deeper into the trees, on limbs that bent wrong, covered in patchy coarse fur that caught the light like bristles on a corpse. It vanished behind a trunk, but I heard it. A low guttural snort, growl that vibrated through the earth, up my spine. Breathing, rasping, patient, lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to make a mistake. Terror clawed at my throat. I pedaled then, not thinking, just fleeing, the chain rattling like chains in a dungeon. The storm broke moments later, rain lashing like accusations, wind howling mockery. Thunder cracked, lightning illuminating the landscape in strobes, and each flash, I swore I saw it. Loping parallel in the trees, eyes fixed on me, unrelenting. I didn't stop, not for shelter, not for breath, until I skidded into our driveway, soaked and trembling. My parents fussed, blaming the storm, but I mumbled about a weird animal. Dad suggested a wolf, but I knew better. Those eyes weren't animals. They were knowing, ancient, filled with a malice that whispered promises of return. Years passed, but the memory festered like an open sore. I left South Dakota after high school, chasing college in the South, settling eventually in rural Georgia, a small unincorporated patch about 40 miles from anything resembling civilization. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but the land here felt kin to that old windbreak. Fields echoing with coyote howls, neighbors distant enough that their porch lights were mere pinpricks in the void. My family followed eventually, drawn by cheaper land, and we claimed a modest homestead. A single-story house with creaky floors and a wraparound porch that sagged under the weight of forgotten years. No streetlights, just moonlight filtering through the heavy clouds, turning the world into a shroud of shadows. I was in my 30s by then, but the habits of fear lingered. We locked our doors tight at night, even the interior ones. An old country ritual against raccoons or strays, or so we told ourselves. But deep down, it was a barrier against the unknown, the things that paced just beyond sight. One cool spring evening in mid-March, after the clocks had shifted and days stretched like taut skin, I lay in bed, the house silent, save for the wind's low moan. My wife was away visiting family, leaving me alone with the creaks and sighs of the old place. I drifted into an uneasy sleep, but something stirred me awake past midnight. No storm, just that same unnatural hush, as if the night itself held its breath. A scratching began, faint at first, then insistent, dragging along the porch like claws testing wood. Heavy, deliberate, echoing the pacing I'd heard all those years ago. My heart slammed against my ribs. I sat up, pressing my ear to the door. Thumps followed, weight landing with purpose, shuffling closer. Panting drifted through, ragged, animalistic, yet laced with a cunning rhythm, like a predator savoring the hunt. The crickets had fallen silent. Even the frogs choked on their own songs. Something was out there, circling, and the world knew to hide. A shadow flickered under the door, blocking the faint hallway nightlight. A hulking form passing by, testing the air. I tiptoed closer, floorboards groaning like warnings, and heard it. A low growl, gravelly and primal, vibrating through the walls like a curse. The doorknob rattled, gently at first, then with force, as if a claw or malformed hand probed for weakness. My mind flashed back to those trees, that stooped figure with glinting eyes. Was it the same? Had it followed me across states, patient as decay, waiting for solitude? The sound shifted, scraping down the hall, brushing walls, then a crack. The front door splintering, hinges screaming as the frame gave way. Not kicked, not forced, torn, with a guttural snarl that blended beast and something worse. Something that mocked humanity. Wood splintered. The door thudded onto the porch. Claws raked across boards, circling outside now. And I knew it had been inside. Sniffing, probing. I crawled under the bed, blanket clutched like a shroud. Dust choking my throat, waiting for it to return. The night stretched eternal, every rustle a promise of intrusion. Dawn came, gray and accusing. I emerged, legs jelly, to find the front door ripped from its hinges. Frame shattered, deadbolt twisted like tin. Claw marks gouged the porch. Deep parallel arcs, an inch apart, etched with fury. Tufts of coarse grayish fur snagged on nails. Not dog or cat, but something wilder, larger, wolf-like, yet wrong. Paw prints in the dirt, elongated, hinting at a bipedal gait. Toes splayed like fingers grasping earth. My family arrived later, faces paling at the sight. Dad, older now but still the rancher, muttered about rabid coyotes or bears, but his eyes betrayed doubt. Neighbors whispered of wild dogs or wolves from the mountains, one even joking about werewolves, his laugh hollow, eyes darting to the shadows. We replaced the door with metal, reinforced the frame, and kept shotguns loaded. But the footsteps returned in the months that followed. Heavy, pacing outside windows, always at night. I heard them, felt those eyes on me again. The same glint from the trees, now closer, hungrier. It wasn't random. It was personal. A stalker across time and distance, drawn to me like a moth to the flame. Or perhaps the reverse. Me, the flame. It, the devouring dark. I'm older now, but the chill never leaves. I lock doors obsessively, scan tree lines and porches for shapes that don't belong. What was it? Not animal, not man. Something in between. Ancient and vengeful, watching from the fringes, waiting to claim what it deems its own. Some nights under stormy skies, I feel it near, breathing just beyond the light, and I wonder if closure is a lie we tell ourselves, Perhaps some entities aren't meant to be understood. They're meant to haunt, to crawl under your skin and nest there forever.